Retro.
Hi, this is Fred Tatasciore, and you're listening to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. The Force is strong with both of them.
Hello there, and welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. We are your Jedi strategists. I'm Dennis Keithley.
Oh, I like that. And I'm Jay Krebs.
And we will be resuming our discussion of the Clone Wars in this episode. But before we start with that, Jay, you want to go ahead and remind everybody where we can find on social media?
Absolutely. Very easy to do. We're on Facebook and Instagram very conveniently at Podcast Stardust.
All right. The dish is aligned. The signal's boosted to maximum output. Shield's down. We are now broadcasting to the galaxy. So it's been a while, but we are finally getting back to the Clone Wars now that we've discussed all 12 episodes of season 2 of Andor and the 3 episodes of Light and Magic, plus the 2 parts of Tales of the Underworld. We had a lot of recent content. So they just dumped on us all at once, which is the type of problem to have. It just meant that we couldn't get back into the Clone Wars the way we wanted to. But we're back, and we are picking up with episode 9 from season 2, which is called Grievous Intrigue. This episode's been out for like 15 years. So if you haven't seen it, go check it out before we get into this discussion, but it will be full spoilers. With all that having been said, and everyone had an opportunity to pause it if they want, Jay, you want to go ahead and give us a summary of this episode, please?
When Jedi Master Eeth Koth is captured by General Grievous above Salakamai, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Anakin Skywalker, and Adi Gallia concoct a plan to rescue him and capture General Grievous. However, the history between Obi-Wan and Grievous causes Grievous to anticipate this. Although Anakin and Adi Gallia successfully rescue Master Koth, General Grievous foils Obi-Wan's attempt to capture him and escapes to Salakamai as his ship and Obi-Wan's cruiser are destroyed in battle.
Right. So this is going to be the first of a 2-parter, as they frequently do in the Clone Wars. What did you think about this one overall, Jay?
Oh, it was so great to revisit. I mean, we've said this so many times about the Clone Wars, but it was very perfect timing, I guess you could say, because we're also getting into that part of our Revenge of the Sith discussion for this year that has been dealing with Obi-Wan meeting up with Grievous once again. And of course, Revenge of the Sith, we didn't know that they had so much history together, but this particular episode really highlights that big time. And it's just great to get back into, seeing the two of them with the banter and, all of the things. And then also seeing how Anakin is reacting to this. And once again, as you've pointed out, they're very, very careful to preserve that meeting between Anakin and Grievous until Revenge of the Sith. So I thought that was pretty good. And it was cool to see Anakin working with Adi Gallia, as opposed to Ahsoka. Not that I'm against that, because it's always great to see those two together, but just seeing how he operates with other Jedi Masters as well.
Yeah. It's funny. Now I'm thinking about it more and more, how hard they work to preserve basically a line, which is, General Grievous, you're not as tall as I expected, and the thing is, that's it. It's not like Anakin and Grievous have like another encounter later. They don't even really come to blows in Revenge of the Sith. And yet they go to these great lengths to protect that one line when there's other like continuity issues that would seem almost more important. They just let slide all the time. But anyway, that's the choice that they chose to make here, and we'll honor it. That being said, this is a fantastic episode. It is really, really action-packed. It accomplishes a whole lot. Did you get a chance, by any chance, to see the featurette that David Filoni did on this on the StarWars.com site?
No, I did not. And I always tell myself that I'm going to watch these, and I just haven't. I need to put that on the top of my to-do list. So remind me, fill me in.
It was fantastic. He was so geeking out while he did this. He was just talking about how, like, I can't remember. It's like, you want to see Star Wars? This is Star Wars. And so he just is going on about how great it is. And he was going on about this deal with Eeth Koth. And I didn't notice this during Attack of the Clones, or maybe I did and I forgot. I'm not sure. But apparently, if it was either in the movie or a source book that came after with it, that seemed to intimate that Eeth Koth perished during the Battle of Geonosis. After the Jedi were rescued, his gunship got shot down and he died in
Oh,
that.
okay.
But then he went and asked Pablo Hidalgo, and he asked Leland Chi. He's like, so what's the deal? Did Eeth Koth really die? And so they were quoting all the sources they had on him, and not satisfied with that, Dave called up George Lucas and said, "Can I bring back Eeth Koth?" And George is like, "Yes, you can." And so that's how we got Eeth Koth in this episode, and how he made his debut in the Clone Wars. I can't do the story justice. It was absolutely fantastic. It was really fun listening to Dave talk about it. He's completely geeking out while he does it. But again, it's super
I
fun.
love that. Like going to
Right.
Papa Lucas, like, am I allowed to do this? Love that.
Yeah. And then on top of that, this episode features a bunch of new stuff. First off, the battleship that Grievous is on is brand new for this episode. They call it a Separatist destroyer, and they call it a support ship in the concept art on StarWars.com. But this was a design that was intended for episode 3 that they did not use. We also got the Republic-like cruiser, and that was the ship that Obi-Wan was on that docked with Grievous's ship.
Mm-hmm.
First time we've seen that ship, and it went on to play a huge role in The Mandalorian. I mean, that became
Oh,
an
yeah.
Imperial cruiser, light cruiser in that, but that's the ship the Mandalorians had that Axe Wolves ended up crashing into Mandalore to take out the Imperial base there. And so again, that ship got its start right here. And then also, to a lesser degree, we get the Jedi Ambassadorial Shuttle, which is the ship that Anakin and Adi Gallia flew to Grievous's destroyer in order to rescue Eeth Koth. And this was based on a Joe Johnston concept art from The Empire Strikes Back. And when I read that on StarWars.com, I was like, wait, I know that concept art they're talking about. You can find it really pretty easy online if you want to. But it was, anyways, it was pretty cool that they were able to do that. And then they debuted a bunch of new models, many of which should actually end up playing a larger part later in the series of the Clone Wars. So we got a Wee-Kay Jedi known as Sarah Bulk, Nikto known as Tucker Van Loo, a new Twi'lek known as Finn Urte. I wonder if they would have used that name if they had any idea that Finn from the Force Awakens was coming.
Mm-hmm.
But then we have a blue Moncall a blue Moncall Amari known as Ikar Oki. And this is where we get introduced to Tara Sanub. And of course, he features in an episode with Ahsoka, Lightsaber Lost, later this season. So, and beyond that, Commander Wolf, who is kind of the clone stand-in for Dave Filoni himself, shows up in this episode with a new eye injury that we had not seen before. So anyway, a lot of new models and art used in this episode that we had not previously seen. And that's kind of one of the things that was always cool about the Clone Wars, is that they started off with a limited amount of assets, but they just kept building and building that library, which allowed them to be more dynamic with every passing episode and season of the show.
Yes, and this one especially has quite a few, as you pointed out, new
Mhm.
assets. And I guess I didn't realize that this was Tara Sanube's introduction. It
Mhm.
didn't even dawn on me, but that particular character has definitely become a fan favorite, and I love that.
Right. Yeah, he's just sitting in that meeting room when the Jedi Council get the call from Grievous, where he's
Mhm.
basically thrown Eeth Koth on the floor and he's standing on his back and he's telling the Jedi how much he hates them and what he's going to do to Eeth Koth. Tara Sanub is in the room. So anyway, that's where we get to see him for the first time, even though he has no lines. Which brings me to the next thing I want to talk about. This is a very, very action-packed sequence. We get plenty of Grievous versus Obi-Wan, Grievous versus Eeth Koth, Grievous versus Adi Gallia. He fights everybody at some point. But he really makes no bones about how much he hates the Jedi in this episode. And I couldn't ever remember hearing any other place where he just talks about his disdain for them. Did that stand out to you at all when you were watching it this week?
Oh, yeah. And, and I think a big thing for Grievous as well is just because they are the thing that's standing in his way. when it comes to him just being able to be successful as the leader of this droid army and just being part of the separatists in general. And they also represent, I think, for him, part of, as far as like for the lore, one of the reasons why his civilization and for him personally, he became who he is. And so
Mhm.
there's this personal vendetta against them as well.
Yeah, because there's none of that backstory in this episode. It's just
No.
him. It's just him. Like, at one point, he's accused of being a murderer, and his response is that is it murder to rid the galaxy of you Jedi filth? And then later he says something along, I only live to see you die. I mean, he's just the venom coming out of his mouth towards the Jedi is just incredible. And the thing is like, I wrote down a lot of these lines, and me reading them, it comes off as ridiculous, but in the moment, they really had an impact on this. At one point, he and Obi-Wan are bantering back and forth, and Obi-Wan is just kind of like beside himself trying to figure out Grievous about, what is it you've got? You have no power. You've got nothing. You're just this twisted machine. I'm paraphrasing, obviously. And Grievous retorted as I'm not in it for Dooku's politics. I'm the leader of the most powerful droid army the galaxy has ever seen. And when Obi-Wan responds to that, it's like, what, an army that has no spirit, no loyalty, what do you, have you to gain? And Grievous' response is that a future where there are no Jedi. I mean, he just wastes no opportunity. He doesn't waste any opportunity to tell the Jedi how much he hates them on
Hmm.
this. And frankly, it's like they need it. I feel like I pick on Revenge of the Sith every time we talk about General Grievous. And I love that movie. It's, we're getting ready to do our next installment in our next episode. And we got a great guest for that. And we talk about Grievous there. And I think that movie is fantastic. I just feel like they could have done more with Grievous in that moment. And conveying this there would have been
Yeah.
so powerful. But what do you think about all that?
Oh yeah. I mean, when you look back on in the Clone Wars, the way that Grievous is portrayed here, he's actually a lot more menacing
Mhm.
in the Clone Wars than he even was in Revenge of the Sith. I mean, if you notice, he's not really coughing in the Clone Wars. He is much more of a stable, again, menacing type of villain. And in Revenge of the Sith, he's kind of already on the decline. I mean, he's terrifying in the Clone
Mhm.
Wars, and even though we did see him do the whole spider crawl thing in Revenge of the Sith, I mean, the way that he does it here it's really eerie. But he's just utterly merciless in the
Right.
Clone Wars, and he's almost kind of above the over the top in some ways in Revenge of the Sith.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, and then, beyond this hatred for the Jedi that he has, we get some really great scenes between him and Obi-Wan. And, the first time Obi-Wan shows up at Seleucami in his ship and he contacts Grievous, and we get that great shimmering holo message that we got to see from
Mhm.
the Phantom Menace. Uh, you know, Obi-Wan shows up. And he says, "General, I knew one day I'd catch up to you." And then Grievous' response is, "Kenobi, what a surprise! I assume you are here to bring me to justice." And again, it's just like he knows his place in this galaxy. The entire galaxy considers him to be a murderer, considers him to be a villain, and he just kind of like is so sarcastic about that. It's like, I do not care.
Yeah.
And Obi-Wan's response to that is like, "You know me too well." And Grievous' response is, Indeed I do," and then hangs up on him. In this moment,
Right.
it's like, "Yeah, you're here. I completely expected it. I'm going to kill you." And then later, when the two ships dock and Grievous shows up on Obi-Wan's ship with first the droid commandos and then later the Magna Guards, they begin to fight, and Grievous kind of throws it in his face. It's like, uh, he knows that there's a plan. And he even says to the battle droids that, where Obi-Wan Kenobi is, Anakin's sure to be lurking around. And he says to him, it's like, "Do you think Skywalker has rescued Master Koth yet?"
Oh,
And
yeah.
so it's like he's taking it to the level. He does not care about Eeth Koth. He does not care about Anakin Skywalker as much as he hates the Jedi. He hates Obi-Wan Kenobi more than any of them in this
Mhm.
case. Why do you think that is? I mean, do we even know? I was trying to think about that. I couldn't come up with a reason for that.
Yeah, poor Obi-Wan. Like he's just targeted by Maul, he's targeted by Grievous, and I think maybe part of it is because Obi-Wan is so cool and calm, and he banters with him. He doesn't play into that at all, and it's kind of like I think with Anakin, if Anakin would have been the one to face him, there might have been a little bit of banter, but I think that it would just be a little bit more to the business kind of thing. But I don't know, something about Obi-Wan just gets under Grievous's chest plates. Can't say skin because he doesn't have skin.
Right. Yeah. And chest plates. I like that. You're looking ahead to the next episode of the show too. Well done. I think you mentioned Maul, and I think there's something to that. Maul wants Obi-Wan Kenobi, as there's a revenge aspect when it comes down to it. I think to a certain degree, how many times has Obi-Wan foiled Grievous? And there's that. But at the same time, so is Anakin and Ahsoka. They did that the last season of the show on this. But beyond that, I think Obi-Wan is probably like a symbol of the ideal of the Jedi there. And Grievous would like nothing more to then snuff that out. I mean, the only person I can think of right now that would be even more a symbol of the ideal would be Master Yoda. But Grievous and Yoda have never come to blows in this situation, or in their past, I should say, on that.
Yeah, yeah. And I think too, all the times that Obi-Wan has faced Grievous, he's almost had like a reoccurring humiliation with him because he
Mhm.
can't beat him. You know what I
Right.
mean? And so he rarely even counters Grievous's tactics. Like he thinks ahead and he's
Mhm.
able to just outsmart him kind of thing. So, and I think that's one of the reasons why Grievous is like, "Oh, the negotiator."
Mhm.
And
The
he says things
negotiator.
yeah. He just injures Grievous's pride more than anything. So, I think there was another one and he says at one point, "Kenobi always meddling," and like it's almost like those darn kids from Scooby Doo.
Right, right. Yeah. So I'm trying to think about what was the name of the ship that had the big giant ion cannons. It's escaping my memory at the moment that, Anakin, Obi-Wan showed up on and destroyed the thing, and Grievous had
Oh
to flee
yeah.
on this one. But
Mhm.
he never saw Anakin, but he did encounter
Yep.
Obi-Wan in that situation there. And so it's like Obi-Wan's always been at kind of like the heart of his defeats
Right.
when it comes down to it. But it's
Yeah.
like episodes like this that really lend to the interpretation of the Obi-Wan Grievous fight in Revenge of the Sith.
Oh, 100%. Yeah,
Mhm.
100%. Yeah, and two, one more thing I was thinking about when we were talking about all this when you said like Obi-Wan going in and being responsible for blowing this up and blowing that up. I mean, he's basically publicly embarrassed him,
Mhm.
Obi-Wan has in front of Dooku and the Separatist Council because Dooku keeps saying, those are expensive, the battle
Right.
droids. And, it's like, oh, geez, Obi-Wan again, you know.
Right. Grievous also uses all four arms with lightsabers in this episode.
He does.
And I couldn't think of another episode of the Clone Wars before this where he did that. The only thing I could think of was when Kit Fisto and his former Padawan showed up at Grievous's lair. Grievous killed the Padawan by he was engaging him with two lightsabers, but then he split his arms and like used a blaster to shoot the Padawan or something like that.
Mhm.
But I think this is the first time we got all Grievous using all four arms.
Yeah.
Does that
He's
seem right to
pulling
you, or
out.
do you?
Yeah. Yeah, it does. Like he's pulling out all the punches at this point.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Well, we've talked about Obi-Wan and Grievous enough. Let's kind of get on to some other aspects of the episode and the time we got left here. Uh, First off, the Anakin and Adi Gallia team up here. I love how she just kind of like stepped into the role of Luminara and like everybody else that finds himself around Anakin and Obi-Wan when they're like making plans on
Oh,
this.
yeah.
Luminara when they were doing the Battle of Geonosis and Anakin and Obi-Wan are just kind of trash talking about who's going to get more kills. And then, Luminar steps in. It's like, gentlemen, if you're quite finished, we have a war rage here. And then here these two are talking about the plan. And she's like, you're going to get how close on
Right.
this? She's like, she's just like a passenger to their recklessness in some way.
It's true. And it's cool because I think this is the only time we ever actually see the two of them fighting together, side by side.
Yeah. Because does where else does Adi Gallia show up in this? Was it her or Stassa Lee? when they get to the episodes with Darth Maul and Savage Opress.
I think it's Stas Ali.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, that ends in disaster for Stas.
Right.
Yeah. But I can't remember if Adi Gallia shows up again or has this prominent role in the Clone Wars. I don't think she
Mhm.
does. Do
Yeah,
you?
I don't think she does either. Yeah,
Yeah.
this is really a highlight for her for sure.
I'd fact check myself with Wikipedia, but by the time we did that, this episode would be over. Um, but she takes it to Grievous in this. And that's kind of
Mhm.
one of the things I appreciate about this is that, yeah, Grievous runs in here, but he does have, before when he captures Eeth Koth, but then he has a fight with Obi-Wan. Now, granted, he brings a whole bunch of droids with him to soften up Obi-Wan. It doesn't work. And then he gets cut off in his attempt to escape by Adi Gallia. And I wouldn't necessarily say she dominated the fight, but she does kind of drive him back and put him on the defensive there.
Oh yeah, she definitely has a lot of great combat skill,
Mhm.
elegant choreography, kind of thing. And she was obviously eventually kind of vulnerable against
Mhm.
him, but she really held her own.
Right. We get Commander Cody and Captain Rex in this episode, and then we get a whole bunch of other clones, and a bunch of them perish here. I couldn't help but thinking about the notion of the disposability of the clones here and the relationship to the Jedi. It's something that's you and I have been talking about as we've done this rewatch here. And, they kind of become lightsaber fodder in a number of
They do.
instances in here. That being said, at the end, when there's that the connecting tube between Grievous's ship and Kenobi's cruiser kind of breaks, and people are getting sucked out into space. Obi-Wan and Adi do take some extra steps to save some of the clones, but they didn't really have a chance against Grievous, but they just kind of stood in his way, and a bunch of them got
Mhm.
slaughtered like that.
Yeah, yeah, and it's moments and episodes like this that really do underscore their disposability,
Mhm.
unfortunately. And, Grievous slashing through them without hesitation. It's not even tactical. You know what I mean? It's
Right.
dismissive kind of thing. And like you said, it's they do try to take the time to save some of them, but they understand that they're in a very high stakes kind of situation. And the goal is to try to capture or kill Grievous, unfortunately, not to take time to rescue clones. So most of the time, as you pointed out, the deaths were very quick, quiet, visually unglamorous kind of thing, and I think that was precisely the point.
Yeah, I'm just thinking back to the history of the show, and in the very first episode, Yoda is on that moon with some clones, and then Asajj Ventress comes down and meddles in Yoda's meeting with King Katunko of the
Mhm.
Toydarians there. And Yoda expresses a bunch of empathy for the clones. He sees them as the individuals they are. He has them take off their helmets. And, even though they protest and say there's not much difference, you're not going to see much different here. We all look like, but Yoda doesn't see it that way. They're all different in the Force. And
Mhm.
then later in that episode where Ahsoka leads that squadron over Ryloth, and she loses a whole bunch of pilots, and she gets back to the Jedi cruiser and she laments how many men she's lost there. But
Right.
it rarely comes up with Anakin or Obi-Wan that they've lost a man, and it's kind of like almost expected they're going to die there. In I kind of feel like the Jedi are supposed to be above that, but they just don't always remember it in that way.
Mhm.
In some ways, and this is harsh based off this one episode, but thinking back to when Obi-Wan was ready to sacrifice R2-D2. This is not a rescue mission. You destroy him. Make sure that that droid doesn't stay in the Separatist hands. And he tells Anakin that droids are a dime a dozen. Not exactly the same situation here, but there's not a whole lot of lament about the potential loss of life for clones.
Mhm. But yet, I mean, even Anakin and Obi-Wan both are very tied to Cody and Rex, so there's the personalization, and obviously they care about those particular clones, but yet, yeah, you're right. I mean, the rest of them are just kind of perceived as fodder, unfortunately,
Yeah.
which is kind of crazy because looking forward just for a second, it just makes me think of the second episode in this arc. I mean, how much it contrasts the faceless nature of clones in this episode versus what we're going to see as the focus of the next episode.
That is what we call a tease. So well done, Jay.
Yes.
And we
Thank
will pick up on that point next week when we talk about the Clone Wars. But I think this is about as good a point to leave things as any. I think we've hit the high points here, and we don't need to go over all the details. Like I said, this episode's been out for a long time. Highly recommend you watch it. It's an A episode, no doubt about it. But do you have any other final thoughts before we wrap things up?
I think we've hit pretty much everything. And I do like the way that they framed all of this. And it's just so great to be able to revisit these. And like I said, I was very much inspired after watching this to go back and watch Gendy Tartakovsky's Clone Wars as well. And just for myself, just to compare and contrast Grievous. So I think that for anyone that's a great little thing, especially if you haven't seen that before. But yeah. Yeah, I think it's a great way to do that.
I rewatched that micro series after our last episode of our Revenge of the Sith series, where we were talking to Alan Zog, and it's like, ooh, I need to go see what Grievous does. And once I turned it on, I couldn't turn it off. So highly recommend that as well. We covered that on the podcast, but I feel like we almost need to cover it again at some point in the near future. So
yes, I would.
We'll figure out a way to do that that's not repetitive. But until then, hang out. Okay, well then, thank you all for joining us for this episode of Podcast Stardust and our discussion of the Clone Wars. We hope you've enjoyed it. And if you want to make sure you get the rest of our discussions about the Clone Wars, then hit that subscribe button on your podcatcher if you have not done so already. And if you would be so kind, we'd greatly appreciate it if you could rate and review the show wherever it is you listen to the podcast. That does help the algorithms that drive, I don't know what you call it, noticeability, but anyway, exposure for the show, and helps others find it. And if you want more of our brand of coverage of Star Wars, then head over to retrozap.com. All previous 902 episodes are there, and skip like the first 10. We had better sound quality and a lot of things going on after that. But at any rate, we're really proud that we've recently surpassed 900 episodes. We are driving towards 1,000 and well beyond that. And thank you for joining us for at least part of the journey. Jay, you want to go ahead and remind everybody what our social media accounts are and where else we can be found online?
I sure will. And it just made me think about our first 10 almost being like the very first cut of Star Wars that we just talked about in our news episode.
That's
So
true.
there's another tease for you. So y'all can go back and listen to that one. So we are on our social media contacts very conveniently at Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust. And we also have all of our Pinterest boards that you can check out, and our 2 YouTube outlets, which is YouTube and YouTube Music. So head over to both of those, like, subscribe, share those out. And those also do support reactions and reviews. So please do so. And then we also have our TeePublic store. So if you are in need or would like some Podcast Artist swag, you can head over to that link in our show notes, pick from one of 7 different show logo designs that are available. And if you do happen to get something, please tag us and post it somewhere so we could see what you got. And it also does help to support the show. So we'd really appreciate it. Once again, if you would hit up that link to TeePublic in our show notes.
Yep. Quick little shout out to, I'm not sure if it's Joe's Woods or Joe S. Woods over on YouTube, who's responding to the news episode from over a week ago. We're talking about the sequel to Spaceballs 2. His response was, wow, I can't believe a second Spaceballs is on the way. Coincidentally, I just finished working with a company to make a one-off custom printed Spaceballs merchandising themed ditty bag to help organize and compartmentalize my backpacking gear. I'll be a little disappointed if the new series isn't called The Schwartz Awakens: The Search for More Money. So yeah, he's on the money with that suggestion there. It's, especially since the line from Spaceballs is Spaceballs 2, The Search for More Money. Yeah, thanks, Joe. We appreciate the feedback on that. Jay, remind everybody what you got going on in cosplay.
Sure thing. So over on my Instagram, you can check out j.snips cosplay for all things that I'm up to. And that would include Ahsoka from actually seasons 3 through 6 of the Clone Wars, as well as my animated and live action versions of Hera, my fourth sister, as well as my original concept Mandalorian based on Tahiri Vela from Legends. So once again, that's at j.snips cosplay.
All right, upcoming on the show on Wednesday, it is part 6 of our Revenge of the Sith series. We kind of teased that a bit ago. And then on Friday, we wrap up the week with a look at some recent Star Wars news. So thanks for listening to episode 903 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great week. And until next time, may the Force be with you.